I want to talk a little bit about the flooding going on in Louisiana. Red Cross is calling this the nation's worst disaster since Superstorm Sandy. We have had double digits number of people killed, 40,000 homes affected, 30,000 people rescued. This is being described as the worst flooding to hit the state of Louisiana by some, although I don't know if there is a complete scientific or meteorological consensus on that. About 8,000 people remain in emergency shelters, and most of Louisiana has received at least a foot of rain since the beginning of this past weekend, some places getting as much as 30 inches of rain. Roland Spano Jr., who's been a member for nearly a year, reached out to me and sent me video and pictures that he took in Louisiana of the devastating flooding. The first is a video that I'll show you and sort of describe for you here, which is actually Roland in a boat, and you can see the water level almost as high as street signs. You can see only the tops of trees. The water seems absolutely filthy, which often happens when floodwaters come in. Really, really, really horrible stuff. And then also a couple of pictures to show you that Roland took. Houses, I mean, half covered by water. Amazing. We have one other picture to show you here. This seems to be a parking lot where you see cars half covered by water, and this is just absolutely disastrous. And Roland actually told me that he was involved in a rescue here, and that he was in the last truck out when rescuing his cousin and her husband. A lot of people have what some would describe sort of like as an irrational fear of flooding, even living in parts of the country where flooding isn't likely. This stuff is the stuff of nightmares, though.
Yeah, and it's amazing the places that it can happen.
Yeah. Not a surprise on the Louisiana coast.
No, no, not at all. But as sea levels rise and the weather changes and we get more and more storms every year, you got to start thinking about possibly avoiding the coast.
This is a climate change story, right? Climate change is not individual weather events. One flood, one record warm day, one record cold day. We've said time and again, we don't want to confuse individual weather events with climate. But when we talk about climate change, we are talking about sea level rise. We're talking about the possibility of coastal areas being permanently underwater as a result of sea level rise, along with patterns of continued record warm days, which we've seen, and I'll tell you about again in a second. Record cold days, flooding in areas that typically don't have it, or more often than they typically have it, or more inches of rain than they would typically have. As far as this individual weather event, it was caused by, number one, huge downpours of rain that are part of what the National Weather Service is calling an inland sheared tropical depression, happening at the same time as nearly record high moisture content in the air. So again, we want to distinguish between weather versus climate, Lewis, but we also want to think about how climate change will influence longer term frequency of certain types of weather events.
Erratic weather, this type of event, yes, it's very scary, but it's happening, and just to be aware of it. And if you live on the coast or in one of these areas, don't go without flood insurance.
I read that in some of these towns, 1-2% of the population of the properties were protected by flood insurance. And I get it, right? I mean, I have a friend who lives on a floodplain in Western Massachusetts. His insurance would have been $1,000 for the year had he been just slightly out of that floodplain. Being in the floodplain, it went up to $7,000 for the year. Some people think, oh, you just get the flood insurance premium. It's not like an extra $100 for the year. I mean, it's a huge, huge price difference. So I get not being able to afford that or opting against it. And then, unfortunately, these are the situations we have where most of those affected did not have flood insurance, and it's absolutely horrible.
Gamefly is sort of like Netflix for video games. They have over 8,000 new and classic games for Xbox One, Xbox 360, PS4, PS3, Wii, and a bunch of other platforms. And you can play as many games as you want for one monthly fee. And if you find some games you want to keep, you can buy them for a low used price. There's never any due dates or late fees, and our audience can get a free 30-day trial at gameflyoffer.com/TDPS. The games are shipped directly to you with return envelopes included. There's no contracts, and you can rent games through the mobile app. Get the free 30-day trial for the David Pakman Show audience and support our show by going to gameflyoffer.com/TDPS.